On a regular basis, somebody will say, statism is inevitable because it's just human nature. And they'll give examples like, if you look back in history, it's just century after century after century of people forming hierarchies and having kings and emperors and presidents and whatever you want to call it, and forming armies and running over there and killing those people and conquering them and stealing their stuff, and then running over here, and this empire has an empire, and still till some people make a little rebel army that overthrows them, and then they build an empire. And so I understand and I sympathize with the people who think that it's just human nature, that authoritarianism is just going to happen because it's wired into us. And if I thought it was actually wired into us and sort of biologically inevitable, I wouldn't bother trying. But it's not at all inevitable. So I wanted to quick talk about the things that are and aren't human nature that people often mistake for a predisposition to authoritarianism, because it isn't at all that. There is in our human nature a tendency to cooperate and get along and trade and work together for mutual benefit. That's the good part. There is also in our human nature, as demonstrated by the daily news and history going back forever, a tendency to not care about each other and think, I'll just beat him up and kill him and take his stuff, or conquer him and take his land or whatever. That's very real. But authoritarianism isn't just that. And by the way, humanity has only very recently started to figure out maybe it's not okay to just violently attack other people because they look different or live in a different place. So humanity has made leaps and bounds of progress in that particular direction. But the thing that matters to me is authoritarianism. And to confuse people's tendency to want to cooperate and even to have a leader and someone to follow, to confuse that with authoritarianism is a massive mistake. And I totally understand why it would make some people go, it's hopeless, you're never gonna get a society without a ruling class. Actually, it's 100% inevitable, and human nature is gonna do nothing to stop it. And here's a very simple example. Let's say a bunch of people, or a bunch of guys or something, saying, let's go on a camping trip. And a bunch of them say, we don't really know it sounds cool, but we don't know what we're doing. We don't have tents. And one guy says, well, I go camping all the time. I own a bunch of tents. I know a great place to go. I know where the trail is. I know all about it because I've done it a million times. And the other ones say, okay, well, sounds cool. We'll come along. We'll go along. You're in charge. When they say you're in charge, and that's something that, things like that happen all the time and have happened forever. When they say you're in charge, they don't mean, henceforth, you're allowed to violently dominate us in any way you please. They mean, we're going to voluntarily and by consent agree to follow your plan and work together and do what you say up until we decide not to. Because until we decide not to is pretty fundamental to actual peaceful coexistence. So when people do that, you can say, well, that's a hierarchy and that's a leader and people want a leader. In a lot of cases, people do want a leader, but a leader is not at all the same thing as a ruler. A ruler is someone who has the right to violently dominate you. So to show how ridiculous it is to claim that authoritarianism is just built into us, let's back up. And now there's a group of guys going, what should we do this weekend? And one says, I hereby declare that you're coming camping with me, whether you like it or not. I'm going to make you pay for it. I'm going to make you carry all the stuff. I'm going to tell you where to go, and I'm going to punish you. In fact, I'm not even going to do it myself. I'm going to make some of you punish the other ones if you disobey whatever arbitrary whims I come up with. Is that human nature? Do people go, sounds awesome, let's do that? Nobody would do that. In fact, they'd never hang around with that guy again because he's a psychopath. Nobody does that. That's authoritarianism. It is not at all in human nature for us to want to be violently dominated against our own will. It's in our nature to cooperate. Sometimes it's in human nature to do nasty things to other people and steal their stuff. But the idea of subverting your own free will and conscience to that of a ruler is absolutely contrary, not just to the human species, but to every species pretty much. You go out in the wild and you try to catch something and put it in a cage, and even if you haven't hurt it, it thrashes and tries to get away. That's That's biological nature of almost everything. And so when people mistake the tendency to build voluntary hierarchies and to get together and to actually follow leaders who say, here's what I believe, here's what I think we should do, here's my plan for whatever, whether it's like an outing on a weekend or to build a village or to, defend a huge area from some invaders. If everybody views everybody else as just people, like the guy who's going to be in charge of the camping trip, he's still just a guy. He doesn't suddenly have the right to rule. He doesn't have the right to tax them and legislate them and sit on a throne and issue decrees and commands. They would think he was nuts if he suggested that. So the idea that we're automatically going to fall back into authoritarianism because we're just wired that way and because we tend to be in groups and we're a social animal and we form hierarchies, there's a giant leap of really bad logic between the two that there is no reason to believe that. One of the most obvious things to me, if we were so hardwired to try to find somebody to rule us and dominate us, it wouldn't require years and years and years of indoctrination through the Prussian schooling system. It wouldn't require constant fear-mongering and propaganda through all the media and all the forms of information everywhere. They're doing that because it's against our nature, completely against all of our biological impulses. So they have to manipulate and exploit other things like fear to dupe us into putting up with something that we do not at all take to naturally. Because it's not human nature to want to be violently dominated. It can be human nature to want to follow somebody else's plan if you're like, well, sounds like you know better than me and that sounds cool, so yeah, I'll help out, I'll go along with it. That's perfectly fine, and that will happen in a stateless society. Voluntarism doesn't rule out hierarchies, it rules out violent domination. So I would suggest that when you go about your daily life today, look around and look at the people and see how many you can find who are going out of their way to try to find people to violently dominate them against their will. Because hey, if that's in human nature, you should see that all over the place on a daily basis. But you don't. Now I know somebody in the comments is going to mention some BDSM kinks. Even that's voluntary, so even that doesn't count as authoritarianism. But it's not how people are, it's not how people behave, and to mistake the tendencies of cooperation and organization and voluntary hierarchy for authoritarianism and to decide, well, we're doomed. But statism forever, authoritarianism forever, oppression forever, because that's just how we are, is a massive mistake and is massively incorrect. Outgrowing and outliving the superstition of authority is 100% inevitable. It's just a matter of time for people to let go of that. Now, changing human nature, that takes a long time. Outliving one particular lie, that's going to happen a lot faster than human nature would ever change.